Welcome to the deep dive. Really glad you could join us. We've got something I think you'll find fascinating today, tailored just for you.
Absolutely.
We are diving into the world of emotional intelligence, EQ. And our main guide here is the work coming out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, particularly from Marc Brackett. We're looking at source materials like an article discussing his ideas and insights from his book, Permission to Feel.
It's really foundational work.
It really is. So our mission today, let's, unpack what EQ actually is. How does it compare to IQ? And crucially, how can we measure it? I mean, beyond those simple online quizzes.
Right, the 1 to 5 scale one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And why is it considered so vital for success and
Yeah.
just general well-being?
Yeah.
Brackett's definition is pretty straightforward, actually.
Mhm.
He says emotional intelligence is how we reason with and about our emotions.
And that reasoning piece, it's not just one skill. He gives us this really useful framework, ruler, R-U-L-E-R. It outlines 5 core emotional skills. Think of them like building blocks.
Okay, ruler. Let's break it down. R is for recognizing emotions. So like reading faces, body language, tone of voice.
Precisely. Picking up those signals. Then comes U for understanding. This is digging a bit deeper, knowing the causes behind emotions. Why am I feeling this? Why might they be feeling that? And also the potential consequences.
Okay. The logic behind the feeling, you could say.
Yeah, sort of. Then L is for labeling. This is about having the right words, moving past just good or bad or stressed.
Using more specific terms like annoyed versus furious or content versus ecstatic.
Exactly, that precision, that vocabulary, it makes a difference. Which leads nicely into E for expressing. How do you actually convey your emotions? Appropriately, for the context, for the people involved.
So not just bottling it up, but not necessarily letting it all hang out either.
Right. It's about skillful communication of feeling. And finally, R again for regulating. This is probably the one people think of most, managing your own feelings, calming down, cheering yourself up. But it's also about helping others manage their emotions, too. Co-regulation, sometimes it's called.
Wow. Okay, so ruler,
Hmm.
recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, regulating.
What's so powerful about it, I think, is that it shows EQ isn't just some, vague personality trait you're born with. These are actual skills, things you can learn, practice, get better at. That's what builds emotional competence.
Which feels like a shift, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
for ages, the focus was so heavily on IQ. Cognitive ability, logic, problem solving, that was seen as the key.
Definitely. The sources you shared even mention that old statistic IQ predicting maybe, 20% of life success?
Yeah, something like that. And emotions were often seen as, messy, unreliable, something to be controlled or ignored, especially in serious settings like work or school.
But Brackett's work in the field now really pushes back on that. It argues that EQ isn't secondary at all. It's potentially dealing with that other huge chunk, that 80% that IQ doesn't fully capture.
Like relationships, decision-making,
Yeah.
stress.
Exactly. Things that profoundly shape our lives, our careers, our health, our emotional skills, or lack thereof, are running in the background, influencing all of that.
Okay, so if it's that important, measuring it accurately becomes really key. And you mentioned earlier those self-assessment quizzes. The sources say they're not great, right?
Yeah, they have limitations. I mean, think about it. How good are we really at judging our own emotional skills objectively? We might be biased. Maybe we think we're great listeners, but others wouldn't agree.
Or we answer how we want to be, not how we actually are. Overconfidence is a big one too, I bet.
For sure. Self-report is just inherently subjective. So the researchers, like at Yale, they lean much more towards performance-based assessment.
Performance-based, so what does that look like?
Well, instead of asking you if you're good at reading emotions, they test it. They might show you short videos or photos of people expressing different feelings, sometimes quite subtle ones.
Yeah.
And your task is to accurately identify or label the emotion being shown. They often use examples from different cultures, too, which is important.
Oh, because how emotions are shown can vary, right? Like the example in the source about smiling in Korea versus the U.S.
Exactly. You have to account for those cultural display rules, what's considered appropriate to show when and how intensely. Ignoring that context leads to misinterpretations.
That makes sense. It sounds much more robust than just asking someone to rate themselves.
It is. And what's really interesting is that these kinds of tests can also reveal underlying biases we might have and how we perceive emotions generally. Like, do you tend to see negativity where it isn't? Or maybe you overlook negative cues because you have a positivity bias.
Oh, interesting. That actually ties into some of the the deeper concepts the sources mentioned, doesn't it? Like attribution bias. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, attribution bias is, well, it's classic low EQ in action, you might say. It's when you basically project your own current feeling onto someone else's behavior, especially if their behavior is kind of neutral or ambiguous.
So if I'm in a bad mood, I might assume my colleague's brief email means they're annoyed with me.
Precisely. Even if they were just busy, you're attributing your internal state to them. It shows a lack of awareness of how your own feelings are coloring your perception. Needs more self-awareness, really.
Our internal state literally changes how we see the world.
It absolutely does. And that connects to another point, how emotion perception shapes our interactions. That initial read you get from someone, are they open, stressed, happy, wary? It subtly guides whether you approach, how you speak, what you expect. Getting that read right or wrong has immediate consequences for the interaction.
Which brings us back to those biases, the positivity or negativity lens we might be looking through.
Right. If you have a strong negativity bias, you might constantly misread neutral cues as hostile, leading you to be defensive or avoidant unnecessarily. Too much positivity bias, and you might miss genuine warning signs or brush off someone's distress.
So understanding your own default filter is key.
It's a huge part of it. Becoming aware of those tendencies, maybe through feedback or even these kinds of performance tests, allows you to adjust and see situations and people more clearly.
Okay, this is all making a strong case for why EQ matters.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the so what. Why invest in developing these skills? Brackett apparently calls one part of his book the money chapter for laying out the core reasons. The sources highlighted two big ones for us.
Yeah, the first one they mentioned is that emotions fundamentally drive attention. What captures your focus? What makes your mind wander? Your feelings are deeply involved.
Like if I'm anxious about something, it's hard to concentrate on anything else.
Exactly. Or if you're bored, your attention drifts. But if you're genuinely interested or excited, you're locked in. So managing your attention often means, first, understanding and managing the underlying emotion. It directs where our mental energy goes.
Okay, that makes sense. Emotions drive attention. What was the second reason?
That emotions influence decision-making significantly. We often like to think we make choices based purely on logic and facts, right?
Well, a rational ideal.
Yeah. But research shows our feelings about the options, the risks involved, the potential outcomes, the people they powerfully shape the choices we ultimately make. Sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. That gut feeling is often an emotional response guiding us.
So even our most logical decisions have an emotional component.
Absolutely. Those two reasons alone, driving attention and influencing decisions, show just how integrated emotions are with thinking and behavior. It's not a separate, lesser system.
It really moves EQ away from just soft skills territory, doesn't it?
Totally. And, while the specific field of EQ research is relatively young, maybe 30 years or so, it's not just pop psychology. It's built on serious science. You mentioned Brackett's book, over 800 citations in there. Places like Yale are developing these objective tools we talked about. It's becoming a rigorous area of study. So when you pull it all together, the ruler skills, the objective ways to measure it, understanding our biases like attribution bias, seeing how emotions steer attention and choices, it really paints a picture of EQ as, well, a core competency. It's a foundational strategy, really, for navigating life.
That quote really resonates now about IQ opening the door, but EQ determining how far you walk through it.
Yeah, I think that sums it up nicely. It suggests EQ is central to actually thriving, not just surviving or achieving in a narrow sense. It impacts everything from personal relationships to professional effectiveness to how we learn in educational settings.
So incredibly relevant for, well, pretty much everyone listening, wouldn't you say?
I would. Whether you're leading a team, teaching students, working as a therapist or coach, or simply want to improve your own life and relationships, understanding and developing EQ seems vital.
A lot to think about.
Definitely. And maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. We talked about how things like attribution bias or general positivity-negativity bias can subtly skew how we perceive others, right?
So thinking about that, what's maybe one small concrete step you could take, perhaps starting today, to just pause for a second, to check in with your own emotional state and potential biases before you interpret or react to someone else's actions or words? Just something to mull over.